Hi everyone, my name is Albert Świdziński. Welcome to Strategy and Future, and welcome to the third installment of our daily series that will run throughout the active phase of Zapad exercise. And with me, of course, is the man who knows all about it, Nick Myers. Nick, thank you for being with us today again.
Hi, Albert. Good to talk to you today.
Good talking to you as well, Nick. So let us begin in a canonical fashion. What is happening? This is the second really day of the active phase, the third installment of our show. How is the situation unfolding as of now when it comes to Zapad?
Yeah, so once again, methodologically, I'm mostly looking at official Russian sources. I know Konrad Ruzek has got some really interesting stuff about the OSINT from satellite imagery going on. I don't really have time to go through all of that, but I'm trying to piece together the different pieces of what the Russians are saying and what the Belarusians are saying in order to put it into some context of the previous exercises. So I'm covering the events now from the beginning of Saturday through what was published, I believe, at 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, Moscow time. So about 36 hours of activity here. So I'm going to share my map here. This is the same map from yesterday. I don't think they've added too many more polygons. I know there's some jokes on the internet right now that they keep adding more locations every couple of hours and the map's starting to fill up. So I've left a couple of the locations off to make sure we don't get too crowded out here. But there's a number of interesting things going on, as you might imagine. First of all, the first major descent exercise has occurred at Struga Krasny here, where the 76th Guards Air Assault Division has done a nocturnal landing facilitated by the A-50 AEW aircraft from the Russian military transport aviation. Facilitated by, I believe, 20 Il-76 heavy transports. Considering how that division is supposed to be deployed again in descent operations on both sides of the Suwałki corridor, both at Pravdinsky in Kaliningrad, and then I believe also in Brest later on in the exercise as well, it's going to be a busy week for those guys if it's all the same force. Though I suspicion it's the two different regiments being fragmented into different tasking. They just haven't given out which one it is. Secondly, the 106th Guards Airborne Division was moved from its home in the Ryazan Oblast out here, way out to Ulyanovsk. Presumably, they just wanted to have a long distance approach for their descent, which is going to be into Ryazan, into Zhitovo Ryazan Oblast later in the exercise. So I have to stand by and see when they decide to do that, but presumably relatively soon. The S-400 batteries from the St. Petersburg area, or at least a couple of them, have been moved down to Ashulak in the Astrakhan area. This is a traditional missile launch base. So this is where the live fire air defense exercise is going to be held. We discussed last time that there was going to be Iskander fire coming from Luga, Leningrad Oblast at some point or other. There's been some discussion among the more OSINT type people that this may have already occurred, though this has not been published by the Russian sources yet. So I'm not going to confirm or deny that at this point. But the Belarusians have also moved their own missile units, including their old Tochkas and the Polonaise MLRS system that was supposedly co-designed in China, out to Saryshaghan in Kazakhstan, which is interesting that they're not being allowed to use some of the Russian facilities for these missile launches. They're going all the way to Kazakhstan. Maybe it's just a long range deployment training opportunity, but still a bit odd. Belarusians probably more interested in defending home more than anything else. We can also now confirm a couple more details about where the 1st Guards Tank Army is deployed. So the 4th Guards Tank Division is in Oboz-Liznovsky, and the 2nd Guards Motor Rifle Division is nearby in Domanovsky. There's a couple of other elements that are already forward in Resh, including some engineers, as well as some airborne troops scouts that are active doing some reconnoitering in order to prepare for what's going to be the second phase, the second larger part of the exercise when the main 76th Guards Air Assault Division shows up. Though I'll have to come back again about this whole phasing notion. Usually Zapad has phases, and I'm not entirely sure this one will have formal phases as it has in previous years. In the Baltic Sea, we started to see a whole bunch of standard naval activities occur at the sea itself. Some ASW, a torpedo exercise from a submarine. The most dramatic incident by far is that there's been an amphibious battle at Khmelivka, right on the coast of Kaliningrad Oblast, where the Northern Fleet Marines, I believe there's 200 of them moved down there, were brought in to assault an unprepared coastline, while the 336th Guards, Naval Infantry Brigades, the Baltic Fleet Marines, were playing the defense. And apparently it was a pretty highly complicatedly scripted battle sequence in which the 336th Guards needed to search around for where the landing was through a system of UAVs and then do all sorts of rapid response. Speaking of the Northern Fleet, we now have a name for the big exercise going on in the Arctic. It's called Arctic Expeditionary Group, which is a very interesting name indeed. So far, they're not moving very far away from their home base yet. There's a whole bunch of activities going on in the Barents Seas. I believe I mentioned yesterday they had minesweepers opening things up, but the Oriole SSGN has fired a Granit missile at a surface ship target, which is kind of an unusual deal. So that's something to bear in mind. And then the 200th Motor Rifle Brigade is also engaged in a pretty intense tank battle right in Pechenga, which is quite close to the Norwegian border. But again, that's its home base. So for an expeditionary group, they haven't really been proven all that expeditionary just yet, but there's time. It's only just getting started now. Elsewhere, we haven't seen too many other particularly interesting movements beyond the ones that I already mentioned yesterday and the ones that I've listed here. Perhaps the only other one that really should be noted, perhaps the only other two major trends that should be noted are that the Western Military District Aviation continues to do air interception missions from further back than where they typically do. So according to the Russian sources, they're principally based right now in Ryazan and Tambov Oblast operational airfields, with some possibly still operating from the main operating base in Tver, but they're operating from there to do air interceptions over St. Petersburg and Belarus. So that's somewhat of a long distance. In addition to which, the long-range aviation 222s, most likely the ones that are based in Kaluga Oblast, just west of Moscow here, have been active in doing some bombing, both in Smolensk Oblast, as well as in the Brest area. So moving all the way up to the front, obviously just firing missiles, so not necessarily, the planes are probably pretty far back, but still making their impact in this exercise fairly early relative to previous scripting.
Nick, if I could just ask, I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Those air intercepts, you mentioned that they're conducted from bases far removed from where the operations are taking place. Why do you think that is? Do you have your theory as to why? Is it out of concern for precision strikes from NATO, or?
I do have a theory. In fact, that's a central component to the second part of what I wanted to discuss tonight. If you don't mind coming back to that. But yes,
fair enough, absolutely.
We do need to go through that. I think the last thing I want to go over specifically is that there was a trilateral urban terrain air assault operation among the Russians, the Kazakhs, and the Belarusians in Belarus. In the Brest area. Most of the activity in Belarus is going on around Brest. So that was quite interesting to see all those things being meshed together. Curiously, the Russian unit involved was not identified. So I'm still a bit hazy as to which precise Russian helicopters are moving where, but they appear to be pretty widely dispersed from the three main bases that they use in the Western Military District. So that's all the news on the tactical front that I think is most interesting. But obviously, there are plenty of additional details if we want to go into there. Do you have any questions for that before I move into my theory of what's going on?
I want to hear the theory, Nick. Let's
you want to hear the theory. All right, so I'm going to switch over to a PowerPoint slide. And I know this is kind of boring here. And it's not especially pretty yet, but this is my working concept here. I say at the top here, Russian phases of hybrid war. And some people are going to say, oh, do you believe in hybrid warfare, therefore? And I would say that the Russians have come up with their own reverse interpretation of what is Gibidnaya Vaina. And we see more and more discussion of this going on in the higher and higher echelons. They don't always use Gibidnaya Vaina among the upper echelons themselves, but they have this continuous thought that the West is coming in to destabilize the country. And what these exercises, especially the Zapad series, is for developing how the military can insert itself into disrupting this process by which the West is trying to destabilize Russia. And in theory, you could say that by using this practice, they could try to reverse engineer it and send it back against the West. I'm pretty certain that elements of that were used in planning the conventional phases of the Donbass operation and even the aspects of the GRU preceding operation. But that's a bit more controversial to argue. But these two boxes I have here, phase 2, insertion of terrorists, phase 3, conventional support. That's the scripted blue force, that is the bad guys from the Russian perspective, action that they're responding to. And so in this response, anti-terrorist operation or defensive and counter-offensive operations, that is the standard, what we expect in the two phases of a Zapad exercise. So this is what you would expect. This is what happened in Zapad 2017, for example. There were two phases to the exercise. In the first one, they were mostly fighting inserted terrorists. You could imagine them being soft forces exacerbating an internal conflict or a protest movement in order to turn it violent, similarly to how Russia perceived the events in Kiev in 2014. And then secondly, after the military successfully suppressed those terrorists, either by wiping them out or isolating them and destroying them, the script called that the West then proceeded to do a more conventional military intervention in order to prevent the protests from being destroyed, probably scripting in something similar to the justification for the Libya campaign, which obviously the Russians had not gotten over in the slightest. And that required a more conventional war operation that became the second phase of Zapad 2017. Obviously, phase 2 and 3 suggest that I think there's a phase 1. I think phase 1 is the fifth column disruption. We're seeing more and more writings about this in the Russian military intelligentsia. The problem with saying that definitively is that, and this, I think that this one's got the weakest case for it, is that there haven't been that many exercises of that. But I would argue there have been at least a couple where there have been peacekeeping operations that have seemed to have failed and served as a pretext for before the Zapad 2017 scenario. So this phase 3 part, where you're doing a meeting operation or simple defensive switching to a counteroffensive, this is like the classic back to the Warsaw Pact era, but you can list off all sorts of stuff where this has occurred. So I just start with Zapad 2013. And Union Shield 2015, for which this was more or less the entirety of the exercise. Zapad 2017 phase 2 and Sheet Soyuz at 29, which was almost a carbon copy of Zapad 2017 phase 2. This phase 2 I have here of the insertion of terrorists, this was played out in phase 1 of Zapad 2017, Sheet Soyuz at 2019, just as I was saying earlier. This phase 1, I only know one major incident of occurring, the spring 2018 Russian-Belarusian peacekeeping exercise. What is interesting about this, and I think that the Michael Kaufman and Konrad Lusik piece that was published about day 1 actually gets this very wrong, is that there are not going to be two phases to this Zapad, seemingly. I kind of hope there are for other reasons, but the notion that that this first phase is the meeting operation, which they write about, has not been true since Union Shield 2015. They don't do meeting operations as the most likely scenario anymore. So it's kind of a dated notion. They're expecting that there's going to be an attempt to destabilize the Union state, followed by an attempt followed by the Russians responding militarily, in a series of escalating actions. Zapad 2021 is unique among the recent exercises in that it starts again with phase 3. But the script that the Belarusians released about a month ago says that phase 1 and phase 2 have already happened. There was a peacekeeping operation. The terrorists from the West were inserted, and then there was an anti-terrorist operation. But now that has failed, the West is starting to do a major action. This is why I think the aircraft have been brought further back than in previous exercises. is that we're actually starting with the breaking point going straight into the conflict. And my hypothesis, if this is correct, and I hope this is true, so there's a bit of confirmation bias here, is that what we're going to see now in the second half of this exercise, if there is a second phase, which bizarrely they're not saying there is, there may very well not be, is phase 4, something we have not seen before. It's the next step of the ladder of escalation past here. Now I say WMD escalation. There are some people listening now who are going to say, "Oh, he thinks escalate to de-escalate is going to happen." And I want to say very overtly, no, I do not think that. The Russians do exercises from time to time, such as the post-Zapad 2017 Molino exercises, where they do blue forces using weapons of mass destruction, and they have to continue a conventional offensive despite this. And the Russians evidently do not want to use their own weapons of mass destruction in response yet. I'm thinking that we might start to see a much bigger script of how they stay sub-strategic nuclear, but moving into an atmosphere where things are really, really dicey because they have extreme discomfort issues with doing this particular step, and they have not exercised it properly in a long time. So that's my working hypothesis as to what might be the exciting bit coming out of Zapad 2021. Obviously, I might be wrong, and we might just stay in phase 3, and it'll be just like Zapad 2013, only a lot more dispersed. But that's what I'm imagining here. So to answer your earlier question, those aircraft are deployed in the rear because they're expecting that, unlike in Zapad 2017, most of their main operating bases are being suppressed in a fairly standard Russian operational tactical aviation exercise in the past couple of years, that they have to move to these smaller airfields and control the airspace from over the course of quite a large range of strategic depth. So yes, very long answer to your question there, but I hope at the very least I've been interesting. And if not, well, I hope somebody found it.
No, it's been
interested me.
Exactly, that's the most important thing. No, what I found interesting, I mean, I would like to go back to WMDs, but what I found interesting is this idea that this could serve to reverse engineer their own operation, and probably not a subject for this fairly short format, but it would be great to return to this again in the future, especially since, if you're looking at this, however you want to define it, or however the umbrella term wide is, the hybrid war, it's not so immediately obvious how you could inject major military force to deal with them, at least from little experience that I had. Maybe we're talking about different levels of escalation as well. But this is, what you said about reverse engineering is very interesting. When it comes to, and before I delve into different questions, when it comes to the phase 4, the alleged so far phase 4, I was wondering, is signaling, because apart from escalate to de-escalate, you can also do tremendous things with signaling when it comes to, to deterring certain actions, readiness drills and so forth, and so on and so forth. Do you think we could see this as well? This more on a level of signaling rather than actual deployment of the weapons?
So I don't want to talk too much about what phase 4 may or may not be, since we don't even know it exists yet. Sure. But I would say it absolutely would have to do with signaling. It would explain why the forces are so incredibly widely dispersed on this occasion. In particular, I don't know where most of the First Guards tank army is, because there's supposedly only 2,600 Russians inside of Belarus, but pretty much the only units that are being identified for the First Guard tank army are supposedly in Belarus. I do not think that the entire 2nd Guards, Motorized Division, 4th Guard Tank Division are all up forward in those polygons in Belarus where they have been stated to be. So in theory, the forces could be very, very widely dispersed right now. If we go back to the map for a second, if you recall from April, the major focus of the exercise was originally thought to be this one here in Polganova in Voronezh Oblast, where the big exercise occurred when there was all the pressure going on in Crimea. And indeed, the 41st Army moved all the way from Siberia out there and then withdrew very quietly in July. There has not been any Russian reporting of what's going on down there yet. I'm sure some activity is happening. We may get some revelations on it later, but there could be quite a lot of masking going on down there that might be a sudden signaling coming up. In the event that there was phase 4, and even if it has nothing to do with WMD, maybe it's a completely different form of masштабное учение transition, where we're moving much more towards concentrated conventional force, similar to the exercise that's just ending now in the Southern Military District, where they start with company tactical groups and they move up and up and up until you get to regimental, even brigade tactical groups. Even if it's going to be as relatively boring as that is, it would still be an interesting signaling mechanism to show the degree of flexibility that the Western Military District is capable of, while still trying to maintain control of an incredibly large space with a very widely dispersed force. And we need to emphasize here that the exercises currently going on closest to the Polish border are quite small still, at least officially. These are very much using UAVs to try to detect where there are illegal border crossings and then doing rapid response elimination. The other thing that I would point out that's quite interesting about Zapad 2021 is that the fact that we're already doing the major defensive exercise. In fact, the Świdziński polygon, this one in the middle of Kaliningrad here, has supposedly already switched to a counteroffensive with attack helicopters. Like this happened Saturday afternoon on like day 1.5 of a 7-day event. So where exactly are we going with this? There's a lot of time in which that offensive is presumably going to fall apart. They have to deal with bigger and bigger crises. So I, for one, am wondering if it's not going to be a WMD escalation. My follow-on guess would be that this is going to be, the next stage would be that NATO is getting its act together in sort of a 30-30-30 scenario, and that what we've seen so far has not necessarily initiated that. And so they're just sort of anticipating that the NATO resistance is going to be able to increase as the exercise wears on. But again, this is all still speculation. So you've heard my theory of what's going on here. But if you want to know specifically what has happened, you probably want to rewind to where I finished off the first question and then ignore everything I've said since then.
When it comes to speculations concerning the scenario yesterday, I think it was previous recording, when you were speaking with Jacek, you mentioned the possibility that this is also geared towards repelling a Ukrainian offensive.
I still don't rule that out. But the thing is, with the Pogonovo polygon so quiet, the time is really starting to run out on whether or not this is a Southwest strategic direction exercise. The 20th Guards Army, so far as I can tell, is pretty much all of its maneuverable components are up in Molino, though not necessarily all. For example, the 6th Army has moved its command brigade up to Molino, so far off from its base out south of St. Petersburg, out all the way out to here, or sorry, north of St. Petersburg, all the way out to here. But they still have at least one of their maneuver units in Luga protecting the Iskanders that are out there. It's both Luga and Kirillovskaya. It's spread across. So they're at least practicing very long distance C2 communications in sort of the everyday tactical running of the exercise. Pretty much the whole ZVO, Western Military District Command, has moved to Nizhny Novgorod at the moment.
This is very interesting, and it ties into what you said before about huge battle space and low saturation, and when you were discussing just a second ago. And of course, that is very interesting to us, apart from just observing Zapad for multiple reasons. But how do you, and related to this, how do you structure the C2? How is C2 structured during the exercise to manage this massive battle space and keep it?
That's an interesting question. My friend Yanis Bershins up in Riga has sent me a article from Gazeta magazine, a newspaper in Russia I don't typically keep up to date with unless it gets retweeted by somebody else that I follow. about some controversy over where the command structure is. So the Gazeta article contended that Lukashenko has done a spanner into the works because these major strategic exercises, joint strategic exercises, I should say, are supposed to be under a single capitulated command. Typically, they would be Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the general staff. But in this particular exercise, it's nominally split between him and the chief of the general staff of Belarus, whose name I'm forgetting right now, and it's really not that important that we remember what it is. I'd be happy to look it up for you if you're interested. And the article plays up the controversy of how there were multiple ceremonies for opening this. There was one in Mulino, there was one in Obrazliznovsky, there was one in Kaliningrad, where the Baltic Fleet commander opened up his own version of Zapad. I'm honestly not sure that we should pay too much attention to the drama that's going on here, but I would emphasize the point that I said a moment ago, that the tactical operational leadership for the Russian Western Military District is pretty much entirely concentrated out here in Mulino. I do not know where the First Guards Tank Army leadership currently is, because they have not been reported out from Mulino. They're the only ones as of yet unaccounted for. Presumably, they're out there with them in order to practice doing operational tactical command from here down to all the way up front in Belarus, which, as you can see, that is quite a long nautical miles. But that is over 1,000 kilometers distance. So we're talking some pretty serious attempts to use some of these communication capabilities the Russians continuously emphasize exercising with more and more frequency of late. But the other thing the one thing that is curious that needs to be put into context right now is that neither Shoigu nor Gerasimov have made an appearance at the exercise just yet. It appears that the senior people in command are Admiral Nosatov, the Baltic Fleet commander in Kaliningrad, and then Colonel General Zhuravlev, the Western Military District commander, who's out in Mulino right now. I'm sure Gerasimov is going to show up relatively soon. If I remember in Kavkaz, he doesn't really show up. He came to something about halfway through and then was there all day at the end. So we don't really know where this is all capitulating to. We don't know if, for example, Putin and Lukashenko are going to do a joint visit somewhere. I personally don't think that they're doing a joint visit or not doing a joint visit is as important as all the wild speculation was in 2017. Obviously, they did show up at the same place. It'd be, yay, rah, it's all going just swimmingly. But part of it is just straight up logistics. With the exercises this far apart, especially since I rather doubt either Poland or Lithuania is going to be all that happy if Putin and Lukashenko just take a hop over the Suwałki corridor to see Kaliningrad. It's just logistically difficult to visit the two different polygons of the two countries in the same day. Whereas in Zapad 2013, when they did that the last time, I think they just hopped from Pskov down to Vitebsk, and that was it. So I would say that there's an interesting question as to whether or not the formal division of the operational leadership, according to who's signing off what, has actually undermined the cohesion of this exercise. But from what I have seen so far, it does not appear to be nearly as unstable as the Gazeta article was making it out to be.
Fair enough, Nick. Since we are slowly approaching our mark here when it comes to time, forgive me. I know this is a question that doesn't maybe exactly stick to the way you describe Zapad, but I was wondering, with the recent migrant crisis at the Polish-Belarusian border, Belarusian-Lithuanian and Belarusian-Latvian border, the concerns were that this could make it even more sketchy, with groups and unaccounted for people being there. Have you, in the Russian media or Belarusian media, have you seen any references to this, how the situation was resolved or taken care of?
So the short answer is no, which is a disappointing answer, but it's an important question. So I'll say what I do know, which is honestly not that much. the first thing that should be noted, and I think Michael Kaufman has already pointed this out in his own blog, and not in his blog, I think in his War on the Rocks article from earlier this week, is that media saturation about this exercise is pretty low, surprisingly low relative to previous exercises, and especially in Belarus. In Zapad 2017, you could find all sorts of bizarre stuff that was probably supposed to be classified on Belarusian news sites. This time, you really got to dig in order to find something that isn't the official line that's going back and forth. So what I know about the migrant crisis was that essentially Lukashenko was importing people from Iraq and then driving them right up to the Lithuanian border and then staging all sorts of events and even faking some video footage of Lithuanians shooting back at refugees coming at the border. Obviously, if this is what's going on, then this is going to introduce all sorts of elements of instability of what the other countries are expecting to occur and might lead to some miscalculations when the exercise really starts to ramp up, especially once the other element of the 76th Guards Air Assault Division starts to deploy down to the Polish-Belarusian border. Just as a note here, this particular polygon here in Brest is like right at the border. I believe you and Jacek are going to be driving down there later this week, and you can almost see it for the tree line and so forth. So you'll probably hear some artillery, which brings some earplugs, but it can get quite close indeed. Though I would also say most of the Lithuanian border has not been officially a part of this exercise to this point. Obviously, there's an exception out here, this particular polygon very close to the Lithuanian border, this one being Dobrovolsk. But because the area of deliberate militarization is a bit farther off from where you'd expect the migrants to be moving, I think that's going to be in itself something of a control on an escalation. Ultimately, though, I think that the historical rule that in order for a crisis in an exercise or in maneuvers to expand into a genuine crisis, there has to be political will on at least one side to do this. And all the elements I see at the moment are that the Russians really don't want to start a fight this time around. And the very short reason why I would say this, in addition to the units being deployed pretty far back in Nizhny Novgorod, they're currently dealing with a whole bunch of fires in the empire in the CSTO. And part of the reason why Poland has not been a big deal so far is because the 41st Army had to be withdrawn to do a whole bunch of snap exercises, which I actually think were genuinely unplanned things in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan over the past couple of weeks and months due to the Taliban's advancing and now accomplished position in Afghanistan. So at the moment, the Russians are quite distracted and actually having quite an interesting freak out diplomacy year. Stark contrast to China, which has been surprisingly boring this year. That's a separate story. So I would not bet on the migrant issue becoming a major flashpoint that suddenly is going to start bringing the world to the edge of World War III. But it is something that we need to bear in mind now, that this is what Lukashenko is willing to do in order to create humiliation, in no small part to try to fuel the fissures that they perceive the West to be applying against themselves in that phase one of the Hybridnaya Vojna model that I brought up earlier.
Absolutely. Nick, it was a great pleasure to have you here again at Strategy and Future. Thank you for this. And we're going to be back with Nick Myers tomorrow, I believe, again.
Sorry for the rambling answers, but everything's too complicated. But it was fun.
It was wonderful. Absolutely. Thanks again, Nick, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Yep. Good night.
Good night.